It's also very unlikely that there's not going to be any exchange of fire, allowing Hamas, under their rules, to start the disarmament. So it just looks like this is going to be the status quo, which is what it is right now.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has formally rejected a 15-point plan for Gaza proposed by Donald Trump's Board of Peace. The plan included the withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza, didn't it, you remember? And the disarmament of Hamas. However, Netanyahu today has told a cabinet meeting that the IDF would not withdraw until Hamas has disarmed. Hamas, for their part, said that handing over their heavy weapons was contingent on Israeli forces ending all forms of aggression, they say, and withdrawing its forces from Gaza. So, there you go. Mick Mulroy is a former US Assistant Secretary for the Middle East under Donald Trump and joins us on Times Radio from Washington tonight. Mick, thank you for being with us. Look, we've got the bones of the story there. Where do you think it leaves us?
Well, Darryl, it's not very good as far as the peace plan goes. It's essentially a recipe for this going nowhere. The plan itself really looked at a phased disarmament with a phased withdrawal of the IDF. As you just said, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think somewhat unusual, public rebuke directly of the White House, who supports this plan. It's a U.S.-backed 15-point peace plan. Said essentially they're not going to withdraw at all until Hamas completely disarms. And he talked about weapons and small arms. That's very, very unlikely to happen. And of course, if the IDF is in Gaza, it's also very unlikely that there's not going to be any exchange of fire, allowing Hamas, under their rules, to start the disarmament. So it just looks like this is going to be the status quo, which is what it is right now.
Okay, we were speaking earlier to Yossi Meckelberg from Chatham House, who sort of his first answer, Mick, was there are elections in Israel in October, that this could be, a play to Netanyahu's domestic audience. A, do you agree? And B, if that's true, does it change the dynamic of the decision any? Does it give any wiggle room for somebody being able to change his mind?
So it certainly could. I mean, he wants to look these elections, but it's unlikely that if he does, say, win the election, or his party does, and he remains prime minister, then he's going to come off it very much, because that is why, in this case, he would have won the election. At least that's how his perception would be. I'm not a political analyst. I'm a national security analyst, and I'm certainly not a political analyst of Israel. But I do think he essentially means this, and he does have a lot of political pressure for him to do this and not pull out of Gaza. There's a lot of pushing on him right now to actually expand and do more than they're doing in Gaza right now.
And likewise, Hamas, I suppose, is somebody able to say to them, and we consider a lot about what Netanyahu's thinking and who's in Netanyahu's ear, is somebody able to say to them, Hamas, disarm now, the heavy munitions disarmament, to take this to the next step?
Well, that somebody, of course, could have been Iran. They're one of Iran's proxies, not as significant and as controlled as Hezbollah, for example. But they have influence. And right now, Iran's pretty emboldened. I mean, the other story I'm sure you're covering today is the fact that Iran's showing absolutely no interest in turning over the Strait of Hormuz, putting it back to where it was before the war started. And they're asking for essentially everything just to get to a point where they can then charge fees for every ship that goes through, and they won't be U.S. or Israeli. So that shows me that Iran has zero interest in trying to control Hamas. They think they're actually in the power seat. Now, needs to find out what is going to happen to them if they actually disarm, because I'm sure Israel doesn't want to talk about the future of Hamas, but ultimately you have to convince them to do it. Okay,
Mick, we're struggling with your line. Can you just briefly give me an answer to this question? Because this is a moment of uncertainty, and it will be on people's minds. This is an impasse in these negotiations. But is there any possibility, or what is the possibility, that it leads to a return to hostilities?
In Gaza, it all depends on how the elections go, I think. Again, not a political analyst, but if Netanyahu stays, I think he'll be emboldened. I think the far right of his party will too, and they will probably keep the fight going. And then if they don't, the opposite might happen.
Okay.
Depends on who gets it.
Yeah, okay, good answer, Mick. Thank you, appreciate it. Thanks for being with us tonight. Mick Mulroy, always good to get your take. He was a former US Assistant Secretary for the Middle East under Donald Trump. Sorry about his line there, but worth persevering with, I think. In the meantime tonight, and not unrelated, the US Department of War has asked the defence industry to rapidly escalate the production of weapons, including those in extreme shortage due to the war in Iran. That's according to a memo that's been obtained by the Washington Post. Steve Feinberg, who is the deputy to Pete Hegseth, the War Secretary, wrote to industry leaders saying that they must dramatically escalate the schedule of provision. The US is fast depleting its stockpile of weapons, apparently, after their 5-month war with Iran. Reports earlier this week suggested that it had run out of virtually all of its long-range missiles. President Donald Trump, for what it's worth, has denied reports the US is suffering a munitions shortage and has vowed in a social media post to seek long-term jail sentences for those suspected of leaking the information. Let's speak to National Security reporter Caitlin Dornbos, who joins us tonight from Washington as well. Caitlin, thank you for being with us. What else did we glean from this memo? What does it sort of tell us about America's stocks?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily about the memo as it is about the information even being out there to begin with. Right. So we had a lot of reporting coming out within recent weeks of this shortage of these munitions that are fairly concerning. We're down to about 800 or so of the critical defensive weapons, defensive missiles that we need to keep our troops safe. Now, that information was made available to the public through the New York Times and through another of other leaks. And I am left wondering, okay, who wants it out there that our service members are at an increased risk of dying or being targeted? And why would somebody want that information to be out there, especially if the president himself doesn't want that information to be out there? And so I think there's a lot of, you can read a lot into the political reactions around that and possibly political motivations around that, and also just the unpopularity of this war. But yeah, I mean, we're lacking enough munitions to do what we need, and the industry has for a long time been under this pressure to try to produce more and more and more, and that's just not how our defense industry is made up right now. It's made up on years-long timelines to produce this types of weaponry.
Just to be clear, Caitlin, are you suggesting that an adversary of America had got hold of this information and brought it to the public attention?
I'm certainly not saying that. I think it's possible, sure. I think it's much more likely that some political factions within the United States leaked this information to outlets who did not, maybe perchance these people did not want the United States participating in longer forms of this war. You've got to think about how the president has been wishy-washy on whether or not we're going to extend our strikes into the Middle East, into Iran, or if we're going to continue and dawdle back to the diplomacy table. You've got serious, splits even within the Republican Party on how that looks. And so, yes, it absolutely could have been a foreign adversary who did this, but getting that information would be pretty tricky for somebody overseas.
Yeah.
It's more likely to have come from someone with that knowledge within the administration, I feel.
And just briefly, Caitlin, we are getting reports of a friction between Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth behind the scenes on this. Look, you've got your... Trump has denied that too, and so hit back at that idea. You've got your right ear to the ground. What's the truth here, Caitlin?
Right. I think that is indicative of those competing political forces within the administration. You do have the Pete Hegseths of the world who view the conflict as we haven't gone far enough. And then there are other politicians within the party as well that have said that, we've gone too far, we need to pull back, we really need to lean into diplomacy. And I mean, I've heard administration officials tell me themselves that they don't believe that a final deal is going to come forward in Iran, but they need to be able to pursue diplomacy because that's kind of the only option at the table right now. And so I think those competing forces around the president could be battling it out on who's going to ultimately succeed in convincing the president to go their way or another.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Caitlin, good to have your company tonight. Really insightful. Thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you. Caitlin Dornbos, who is a national security reporter in Washington for us on Times Radio tonight.